This is a gathering that we've had now working with Jeanette Wright from StillHereSF for, I guess it's since like October now. It's been about 8 months. And Jeanette has been putting on housing events in District 11. We've got 2 so far at the Powerhouse on San Jose and Geneva Avenue. And these events have really been focused on mostly like within the BIPOC community, Black community of San Francisco, and looking at housing needs that are pertinent to our communities here in the southern neighborhoods. And this is a very different household typology that we have, where San Francisco is predominantly renter, like 2/3 of the city is renter. In the southern neighborhoods of San Francisco, we're about 1/3 renters and 2/3 homeowners. And then homeowners also have renters in their single-family homes as well through accessory dwelling units. And our southern neighborhoods are mostly working class people who work for the city, people who could be educators or construction trade workers or healthcare workers, and don't have a lot of like wealth in stocks and real estate development the way other neighborhood residents might have in San Francisco. And we've also been, in the southern neighborhoods of San Francisco, have been really impacted by the lack of investment from the city, predatory lending from financial institutions, including local banks like Wells Fargo and formerly local banks like Bank of America. The foreclosure crisis and the subprime loan crisis hit these neighborhoods really hard. We saw a lot of out-migration of African American households and other people of color households from this part of San Francisco. And the city has not been really adequately addressing the needs of these households. And we've seen over the past maybe 10 years, about at least $1 billion have been put forward from the city of local money for housing development. Very little of that has been part of addressing the needs of households in these southern neighborhoods, households that are property rich but cash poor. And yet often, especially when we have like housing bonds that voters approve, the housing bonds are at the voters' approval, yet these households have not really received the major benefits of that. There was just a recent bond that was passed, $300 million. It was Prop A, and this is our literature for Prop A. And this literature features Jeanette and Dave Roach, Frank Jeanette, Dave, let's get the Frank. And I want to actually get this to you for our collaboration together, and also your work in helping promote Prop A, which was a significant thing for San Francisco residents to actually have more money coming in. We saw this Prop A campaign as a way that we can educate voters in the southern neighborhoods about how we can do greater investments, and Prop A did fund preservation programs, but we don't have a design for preservation programs that is as specific to these households in these southern neighborhoods as we'd like it to be. And so today is really about how we can envision or understand what the needs are of households in this part of town, what some of the models that are out there, and Saki Bailey with the San Francisco Community Land Trust is doing a lot of work around preservation and small sites and community ownership and cooperative ownership that I think could be helpful models for us to discuss. And how we can support a greater investment that comes back to our communities. And then in November of this year, in the Bay Area, in the 9 Bay Area counties, we're going to have a bond, likely close to $20 billion or maybe $20 billion for affordable housing development. It'll be, part of it will be for production, part of it will be for preservation, and part of it will be for protecting tenants. And then part of it is also really flexible, that could be spent on whatever the community decides or the city decides. And we want to make sure from residents that are actually grappling with how hard it is to maintain our wealth in our households and across generations, how we can have a say in how these funds are going to be utilized. So we can really see that if we're voting in favor of this, we see a real benefit to what's to come to our communities, our households here in these southern neighborhoods of San Francisco. And this is a bond, doesn't have a letter or number yet. It's a regional bond. I actually believe that the neighborhoods of San Francisco, these southern neighborhoods, are kind of like a microcosm of the rest of the Bay Area, which probably has a high level of, single-family homes and households that own property that are struggling the way that many folks are in how do we actually maintain our ability to stay in the Bay Area in San Francisco and maintain our family wealth. So this is one part of like the overall work that the Council of Community Housing Organization does is we have typically worked on deeply affordable housing, but we also have to make sure that we're actually representing the people who are living with a great insecurity around housing, who actually might be in the middle income, bracket, and that's what this is about today. So that's a very long intro, but I really appreciate folks being here, and it's such an intimate setting. It would be great if we could just do really introductions and just go around and end with you.
Hello, my name is Jeanette, right? And I am a long-time resident, native actually, of San Francisco, this district, District 11, not too far from here. I'm the founder of Still Here, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Charlie Shamos, and I'm about a 15-year resident of Excelsior, with 30 plus years in the city, and I also work at the Council of Community Housing Organizations alongside John. I'm really excited about this conversation.
Hey everybody, my name is Zach Weisenberger. I am a land use policy analyst at Young Community Developers. We're a Black-led organization at Lake Gunners Point. I'm also born and raised in San Francisco, so that's why I do this work, because I care about these communities that we're talking about. So happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm in New York with Abby, and I came to my lady in 1972, and I lived in San Francisco residence with that. I'm from New and I would like to know what details I can do for my children and grandchildren.
My name is Barbara Brown, and I'm here by way of Texas. I arrived in San Francisco in 71, and I've been a resident of OMI ever since. I spent a long time in Daly City, but I moved back here when I was able to buy a home.
I'm a resident of Western Division of Fillmore for the last 17 years within CLF, and that's a Black-led organization advocating for the rights of the BIPOC community. We're a qualified QMP with MOCD and COPA programs, so we're looking to hopefully get our first property through the program.
And NCLF stands for?
New Community Leadership Foundation.
Hi everyone, I'm Ozzy. I work at the San Francisco Community Land Trust at Saki. I joined about a year ago as a finance director and moved to San Francisco only about 2 years ago from Toronto, Canada, so relatively new.
Should I get also just a short intro or should I try?
Okay. So I'm Saki Bailey. I'm the Executive Director of San Francisco Community Land Trust, and I, since we're all sharing our histories, I've lived in the Bay Area since age 6 when my parents emigrated here. And from there, I lived in San Francisco in the early 2000s when I went to law school here. But then since then was displaced to the East Bay by the lack of affordability in San Francisco. So I live now in the East Bay. And a little bit about San Francisco Community Land Trust. We're a 20-year organization that came into existence around that time of the early 2000s, when there was this dot-com bust situation where finally prices in the city were becoming more affordable, right? In terms of rents were becoming more affordable again, and there was an opportunity to come in and purchase some of the buildings. And a group of activists founded the organization, seeing that opportunity to potentially buy buildings that were a lot less expensive in that period. And I'll stop there. I'll say more about what we do as an organization, what we've achieved in this 20-year period, but we'll stop here.
Great, thank you. I didn't actually properly introduce myself. I think most people know who I am, but I'm John Avalos, and I'm the executive director of the Council of Community Housing Organizations. And we're an organization that is comprised of a coalition that's comprised of about 21 organizations, many of which are community housing development organizations, working in neighborhoods from Chinatown to Bayview, the Western Addition, Tenderloin, and Mission. And our work is really around how we can create innovation and resources to produce, preserve, and protect affordable housing in San Francisco. And this is our Affordable Housing Month. And this is one of our Affordable Housing Month events. Our theme for Affordable Housing Month this year is housing justice for a city where we all belong. I think that's one of the main differences that we see between the work of community housing organizations and, say, market rate developers, is that we're looking at how do we build housing and preserve housing for the residents that are already here, who belong here, and can continue to create a city where we have that sense of belonging. We can have purpose and agency to be able to shape what our city looks like. And so today is really about that. So welcome. So we thought we'd do is we'd have a discussion, like Jeanette has been here for a few generations of our family being here, and has recently had some triumphs, but very hard work to achieve those triumphs, and being able to stay in the city and gain property in the city. And I would love if you could share your story and about your family, saying you're in San Francisco.
Absolutely. I'll share a little brief thank you again. I have to go and just pay homage to my mom and dad, who had the fortune to be able to purchase here in San Francisco. And they purchased a home right here in the OMI in 1955. And at the time that they purchased their home, it was $13,500. And from my understanding, I think their mortgage was maybe about $75 a month, something like that. And so I just wanted to set the presence there, just because last week a house across the street, our house is a two bedroom, 1 bathroom, across the street sold for $2 million. And so what happened with my situation is actually, I'm not sure if you know that later when I was adult, and a younger adult, I was looking to purchase in San Francisco and went through the San Francisco Housing and Development Corporation on 3rd Street, went through their program and got my certificate to be a first-time homeowner, and was looking to purchase and get some support around that. Unfortunately, my parents were in one of the predatory lending loans from Wells Fargo, and it was a balloon loan or payment where it just continues to increase yearly. It seemed like it was increasing before that. And unfortunately, my father had passed away, and we were looking at all kinds of ways that we could continue to keep the home. And fortunately, I was able to refinance with my mother to be able to keep the property. And so that, released me from being a first-time homeowner. I was able to go that route. Fortunately, I was able to continue to keep my home, as I couldn't see us without me being able to have that property. And so that was the first time where I understood about home ownership and everything that you needed to just be stable, making sure that we had a living trust and all of that in place. Fast forward, my grandmother had a property, or has a property in Bailey, which is now mine, unfortunately. My cousins and I owned the property, or my mother and her brother who passed away. And fortunately, we had a living trust set up. So half of the property was preserved, but because my mother's brother didn't have anything set up, the whole property went into probate. And so we were dealing with probate for about 3 years. And fortunately, we had our family work together, but I know a lot of situations kind of fall apart, and that's when a lot of families lose property due to probate. And so I tried to purchase it from them through probate, but unfortunately they're not favorable for that. So we were able to complete probate, and I was able to purchase the property, or the half of the property, from my cousins, and so we now have the other property. But everything that I learned in that process, I just wanted to share with the communities, just to make sure that we were setting up ourselves to continue to pass down generational wealth. And when I was looking to do the symposium, a great friend of mine connected me with John, and we were able to bring out several other organizations to hear from the community, and finding out that I wasn't the only one going through a situation similar to this, that there were several people as far as needing to fix up their homes, from rundown and not having the means to do it. We brought out Habitat for Humanity, Rebuilding Together, to find out some of those resources. And we were just really hearing from the community to see what the needs were, and seeing that there was a multitude, right, of needs from the community. And that's why we've been continuing to do this. Thank you so very much for continuing to work with me, and just hearing from the community. It's just a little bit about, my story. I was able to overcome, but I wanted to make sure that I continue to share the resources and the information with many residents in OMI, which 11 we seem to be left out a lot of the time. So, thank you.
Becca, thank you for sharing that. So we would love to be able to hear about the community land trust model, and it'd be great to hear kind of your history and how it's worked, what the innovations that you've been able to put in place, and then think about what we want to ask you about this population here that we've met now a couple times, and the issue about multi-generational households being able to remain in the city. How do we actually build within a household to actually house multiple generations? Is it possible to convert a household through accessory dwelling units, or condomization, or building more units at a site? Is a community land trust model something that could enable other policy changes that would help to enable other collective ownership? those are kind of questions that have come out of our previous times coming together, and love to hear your thoughts about it.
Oh, great. Thank you. So I'll just do a little intro about SFCLT. So we came into existence, as I said, about 20 years ago, and the first project that we had was a project called Columbus United Cooperative. This was a project in Chinatown, and it was a group of tenants, mostly Chinese, first generation, and Chinese Americans, who had been living there, many of them for decades. And the city college was the landlord, actually, of that building. And, they were not great landlords, I have to report, right? So there were issues of habitability. At some point they wanted to demolish the building. The tenants continued to be in conversation with the city college, telling them, look, no, we really would like to remain. This is really our only way that we can stay in the city. The rents were extremely low at the time. And eventually they came into contact with the activists that I was referring to earlier that were coming together in that early 2000s period, trying to address the issue of displacement. And this is in the early days of San Francisco, when there wasn't a preservation program and there really wasn't a lot of talk about the issue of displacement. And so it was really, we were kind of pioneers, I think, in addressing this issue of displacement and saying, hey, look, we actually need to think about resources and creating resources for people like the residents at Columbus United, to be able to access financing, to be able to purchase their buildings, and to be able to remain in their buildings. And so really kind of birthing in a way the whole anti-displacement concept of like, okay, it's not just that we create affordable housing through affordable housing production, where we build these new buildings and we try to create affordability that way, but instead let's keep people housed today, not 10 years from now, by building the new construction buildings, which often are more expensive than rent-controlled buildings because the cost of construction is very high. So it takes time for that affordability to happen. And often in those buildings, there aren't, in new construction, there really aren't that many units that are also set aside for the inclusionary program, like attempting to keep certain units affordable. And affordable housing construction, yes, it's an important thing, but it was really the statement that we need to have alongside this a way to keep people housed where they currently are in the buildings that they live in, that people deserve to stay in the neighborhoods that they already exist and live in, that people shouldn't have to move across the city to an affordable housing complex, that they should be able to live actually in nice neighborhoods like Chinatown or in more central parts of the city. So that concept was really that, and out of this, the activists at San Francisco Community Land Trust were able to work with those tenants to purchase that building. Working with the city, we created a path for a kind of carve out for preservation funds that had never existed before out of a seismic safety program. And so the building was purchased with a combination of those city funds as well as a CDFI, Community Development Finance Institution. These are kind of like the friendly lenders, friendly banks that lend to nonprofits. And together we were able to purchase this building, a 21-unit building in Chinatown, right there on Columbus, really beautiful part of the city. And we were able to also rehab the building and bring it up to the conditions that the people there really deserve to have, right? Because that was a big part of the problem in the first place, that the building was really run down and really wasn't taken care of well. So, and beyond that, we were able to turn it into home ownership. So typically, when you hear about preservation work now, which is this anti-displacement strategy, separate from the production strategy of affordable housing, they're mostly permanently affordable rentals. So there's no pathway to home ownership, right? I mean, you have a stable home, that's very, very important work. So not at all to criticize that. But there's also a need, I think, for especially communities of color to have a pathway to home ownership, because home ownership is about building generational wealth, building community wealth, building individual equity, which is a big part of the American dream, and I think it's a big part of how we operate, in our society. What is the American dream? It's home ownership, right? And so the idea that people who don't have, the means to buy into home ownership should be excluded, and they should just be happy with rentals. We feel like that's not enough. We really feel like there should be pathways. So we converted this 21-unit building into a limited equity housing cooperative, which is a form of home ownership, which keeps the building permanently affordable. So it stays permanently affordable in that the resale price of the unit is restricted, right? It doesn't just float on the market, so it's not just floating on the speculative market. It's pegged to an index, and so we're able to that way keep the appreciation limited, something that you can have in your pocket, and you have all the rights of home ownership otherwise. You can pass your unit on to your successors, so your children get to live in that building, right? And it gets passed on to them, which is not something that necessarily happens with rental properties. It can, some people can pass their rent-controlled units off to their children, but it's not guaranteed, right? So we're able to provide that sense of being able to build generational wealth and equity in a building in a really great part of the city at the tune of $14,000 a unit, which is probably the cheapest form of homeownership that could possibly exist in San Francisco. So today, we're able to offer those units when they do come up for resale at $14,000. We think it's an exciting model for creating home ownership. And especially for people who really can't afford a down payment, even for a BMR unit, right? Because as I was saying, many people can afford $14,000. Some folks may not be able to afford $40,000, $50,000, $100,000, to buy in to the market or even to a below market rate unit. So we're really targeting people of the lowest area median incomes, and we're trying to create home ownership opportunities for those folks, because we think people who are at 30%, 40% area median income should also have a dream and should also be able to own a home. So, and that's really the average area median income of those residents in the Chinatown building. In this Chinatown building, it's the average is 40% area median income. So we think it's exciting. We since then have not been able to convert the rest of our buildings. So now fast forward to today. San Francisco Community Land Trust today owns 15 buildings and 148 units of housing across the city. We are the second largest developer of the Small Sites Fund, which is way behind from Meta, which is the Mission Economic Development Agency. That is the first. They have something like 600 units of housing. Wow. Yeah. So I think SFHDC has something similar to what we have as well. So we're also the only citywide developer, because a lot of the other housing organizations focus on specific neighborhoods. Unfortunately, in between that Columbus United Cooperative project and, today, the Mayor's Office of Housing took the position, although their Small Sites Fund, which is the fund that funds the acquisition of these buildings, although that fund was designated even very specifically in the Small Sites Ordinance for limited equity housing cooperative conversion, they decided, no, internally we don't want to have any more co-op conversions in this city. We would like to keep all of these buildings permanently affordable rentals. And so we got stuck in a kind of mission paralysis, because where our goal was all of these buildings should be converted over time to limited equity housing cooperatives. Some are ready to convert very quickly. The Columbus United Cooperative Project was able to convert within 2 years. Other projects, we go through a whole process of education with the tenants, because home ownership is not easy, especially collective home ownership. And so we go through not just the usual pre and post education, home ownership education, like many home ownership programs, but we also go through the whole process of teaching residents how to care for the building and on their own, right? So it's really like building a finance committee and figuring out how much, the building is costing every resident, and understanding their annual budget, and understanding their capital needs and how that's going to relate to the budget, how much has to be set aside for reserves. So we really go through the whole process of teaching residents about all these different aspects of managing a building, both the physical aspect of the building as well as the financial, and then also working with the social aspect of the building, which is a big part of it, because sometimes people don't get along, as we know, and sometimes it's hard to govern things collectively. And so we also work on that, working on governance. What does governance look like? We write bylaws together with the residents. We write house rules together with the residents. So there is a long process. But many of these buildings, we had hoped, and we were on the path in converting many of these buildings, working on the education with tenants. And at some point we were told, no, we're not going to actually convert any of these.
Could you say, do you go with the rationale that MOHCD provided for why they wouldn't support conversion versus just going on with continuing with rental?
Yeah, it's a very clear narrative. There is a narrative in San Francisco, which is that co-ops are a hot mess, and that comes from the HUD co-ops. Yeah, so at some point, there were, a number of buildings. I think there's about 18, something like that. There's freestanding and HUD co-ops. There's 9 very large HUD co-ops. These are co-ops with hundreds of units. They were created by the federal government. There was a lot of investment initially put into them in the 70s, and then all of that got slashed in the Reagan era, right? And so there was a huge amount of disinvestment in these buildings and in these communities also being primarily Black, and also other people of color. And it's the usual story. It's like communities of color being abandoned by the state, and then the story is, well, it must have been their failure, rather than point to the failure of the lack of investment and the lack of continued support. It's like, oh, well, it must have been their problem. No, obviously these buildings and these communities were set up for failure, right? Yeah. You can't walk away from a building of hundreds of shareholders that all have entitlements to their building, and then very large buildings that need continuous investment for addressing their capital needs. And so today, the HUD co-ops are a thorn in the side of the mayor's office housing, and they don't know how to solve the problem. There is actually a co-op RFP that's going to go out in NOFA that's coming out this summer for $18 million to try to address some of the problems of these HUD co-ops. But $18 million, I'm going to tell you, it's a drop in the bucket of what actually needs to happen with the entire community of HUD co-ops that needs to be served. That's going to serve at most 3 buildings, and there's 9 HUD co-ops that all need attention. So
the funding for that is from the federal government through MOHCD? It's all MOHCD?
There was a $20 million co-op set aside that has been floating around. It was part of the Prop I funding that was supposed to be actually released earlier. Of course, we understand the delays of government. It's finally coming out, and it was reduced initially to $9 million. Housing Director Daniel Adams has really stepped up and found an additional $9 million to plug in there. But it's anyway, the narrative about co-ops being a hot mess really comes from that ugly story. And I really think that our story of co-ops has to be distinguished from this story, because the co-ops that we create have not had this history of disinvestment, right? So Columbus United Cooperative, I will tell you, it is our most successful building. During the COVID period, we had not 1 cent of arrears in this building. That is highly unusual, because I think if we were speaking to other housing developers, they tell you almost every single one of their buildings had arrears during this period. And that was the case for our portfolio. So the fact that this building didn't have 1 cent of arrears is a real testament to, you know, the strength of that community and the way that they collectively work together to ensure that they were able to make their carrying charges. So this is different from rent. It's what they it's like a condo fee, right? It's what they pay in to keep the building operating. The fact that there wasn't 1 cent of arrears is really an amazing thing. I think it really speaks to this sense of ownership and the sense of investment that this community had, and the sense of working together too as a community, because of course there were some households that were struggling to make their rents, because again, this is a community of people at 40% AMI, right? So there were people struggling to make their carrying charges, and the community came together to find ways to make sure that they could keep those payments going. So that's a very different story than the story of the disinvestment around HUD co-ops. And I think we're trying to say, hey, you know, it's not like one day, you know, oh, so one duplex had a problem of, you know, keeping its finances going. Oh, you know what? We're just going to get rid of the whole duplex typology of housing. Like, it's just, you know, limited equity housing cooperatives and co-ops are one typology of housing. Of course, you can have failed co-op projects and you can have successful co-op projects, but you don't do away with the whole typology of the project. You know what I'm saying? It just that makes no sense.
So now we're seeing potentially approval of, you know, what would come to San Francisco from a $20 billion regional housing bond is about $2.4 billion, and you know how much of that? I think it's 15% would be for preservation, and the part for 52% for production. That's a significant amount of money that's coming in.
That's right. That's
do you see? Is there a consciousness about, you know, investing in the cooperative and the community land trust model? Is that percolating up towards an expenditure plan for how bond funds could be used here in San Francisco or in the Bay Area? Are you hearing that discussed?
Absolutely, absolutely. And a lot of this, you know, it comes from the advocacy of our communities. And this is why organizations like CCHO are so important, because we need the advocacy organizations to really create the policies we need to create the housing we need, right? Because a lot of the policies out there are inadequate. They don't support our housing models. I can tell, I could go on for a long time, which I won't, about all the ways in which current state policy does not support the limited equity housing cooperative model to really thrive and flourish and grow. But you know, I think that because of the advocacy of the California Community Land Trust Network and others, really pushing BAFA, you know, this is the fund, the regional fund that the agency, the Bay Area Housing Finance Authority. Did I get it?
Yes,
okay.
you did.
Long acronym. These acronyms are driving me absolutely nuts. Gosh. But you know, so BAFA, because of the advocacy of the California Community Land Trust Network, really decided to incorporate that the community land trust as a model that could benefit from these preservation funds. It wouldn't have happened otherwise. Because let me tell you, Kate Hartley, who is the director of BAFA, is not our greatest fan in terms of like the CLT and co-op model. I think that because of the advocacy and because of the people that are also working within BAFA, who are supportive of the model, I think you know, Director Hartley has really started to change her view about the importance of the inclusion of this strategy. I think it's also about the way in which the community land trust model in more recent years has become a real hot topic and a really important tool in the affordable housing toolkit. Before, we were completely marginalized. I heard the other day that Raphael Mandelman was talking about creating his own CLT in the Castro because it's such a hot ticket item. It's so sexy now that, you know, every supervisor is kind of like, ooh, could we get in on this too? Or for example, the County of Marin is like creating their own CLT. Long Beach created their own CLT where the mayor put, you know, funding into it, and that they grew from a staff of 2 to a staff of 14. So the community land trust model has finally landed itself on the map. And I think all of that has also really influenced BAFA to ensure that community land trusts can benefit from this funding. So yes, so John, the answer is BAFA funds can be used for community land trust project. projects, and they can be used for co-op projects by extension. In fact, because of the advocacy of the California Community Land Trust Network, we were able to actually get a very specific provision in the funding requirements that says, yes, you can convert to co-op. You need 100% consensus of the residents, but it's all there. Yeah.
One more question for me, that I can pass it on to others who might have it. Thinking about these neighborhoods here in the southern part of the city, where we have, we've actually have not had a significant amount of development nor displacement that has happened in other parts of San Francisco. We have seen, especially from 2000 to 2010, in the Portola, in Visitation Valley, in the OMI, and the Excelsior, we've seen a population boom, mostly like households like converting part of the garages into accessory dwelling units, and we saw a swelling of our population, but we're still fairly middle class, working class residents of the city, but we're at this cusp where we've dealt with one kind of foreclosure crisis and defaults that affected because of the subprime loan crisis that hit these neighborhoods in San Francisco. We've had some stabilization since that time, but we're starting to see that happening again, like the inability to actually maintain mortgages and to keep that wealth in the family. How do you see the cooperative model, CLT model, as something that could enable households to regroup and to collectively own either within a lot, potentially, or across a neighborhood or a street, to be able to do that in a way that could, is that something that is possible in the city? And if there's an investment that comes from significantly sized regional bond or other sources, could that be something that could help enable these type of ownership models to flourish in the city?
I think so. I mean, I think one thing that I will say is that we invite more CLTs to pop up and occupy the space, because part of what we do is really dependent on the grassroots organizing and empowerment of the tenants and the residents who really live in those buildings. And so if like 8 blocks in San Francisco wanted to stand up and say, hey, listen, we want to figure out how we can purchase these blocks together and like create a land trust around it, we'd be more than supportive. And I think, and I'm going to divert this for a second over to some of the issues that we've been having within the land trust world in terms of funding this work and ensuring that these organizations that do pop up actually can support the projects that they are working on. I think what I just want to say is that yes, we absolutely think that the land trust model is a way in which to create long-term home ownership and legacy wealth building for those communities of color, and it has a very hyper localized focus, which I think is really powerful. I think that's really what the value added of the community land trust phrase is, that we are talking about not only empowering tenants in the short term to purchase their building, which might be the case with a CDC that goes into a community and works with tenants to purchase their building, but we're talking about the ongoing participation of those residents in the management of their housing and control over their housing. Because we know what happens when people look away and turn things over to bureaucrats or to turn things over to administrators or technocrats. We know that eventually they're going to come back around and say, hey, wait a second, you're not making your payments and X, Y, and Z is happening. We're going to have to evict these people because of the non-payment and so forth. So the engagement is critical because we need a constant watchdog over the constraints and the structure of capitalism and financing, which is really, really imperfect and wrong, right? Like, why is it that if people who are living in a building, if a few of them are unable to pay rent for very good reasons, are then told that they have to be evicted from their building? Why isn't it that reserves couldn't have been built in to provide operating subsidies, so that because it's expected that there will be a certain percentage of that building of folks who will be unable to pay, and to prepare for that scenario and see it as an important aspect of the model, rather than an emergency thing that's just going to happen, and then we're going to have to evict people. So building those reserves, I think, is something that is very feasible if we're able to kind of anticipate for it. So backing up a little bit, I think that in today's landscape, absolutely working to save your building. If you're living in an uninhabitable building and your landlord is a slumlord, and the residents in that building want to come together to purchase that building, they could come to us as a land trust, or they could figure out a way to become a land trust themselves. The real issue is about the credibility and the technical long-term support that you're going to offer that building, so that you're able to then manage it in the long term, right? And that's a very difficult thing. I was just talking to Mary, about her experience working in the small sites program, and for many small nonprofits, like ours, the thing that the banks and the Mayor's Office of Housing and any other partner will do is they'll scrutinize your ability to carry that project and the capacity that you have, and that you have to demonstrate yourself as a credible organization to lend to. And so this is a problem that we're trying to address from the community land trust standpoint. It's like, how can we encourage the popping up of more communities that are empowered, that want to create their own land trusts, that want to purchase their own buildings, but then to provide an infrastructure for those land trusts to lean on, so that we can get the loans from the banks that we need to buy those buildings, the partners from the government that we also need to purchase those buildings, and to be able to demonstrate that we truly have the capacity to run those buildings. And that really comes, I think, and we have a project, SFCLT, that we launched last year on the back of a $20 million grant that we received from Mackenzie Scott. So we received a very large grant last year that was a big game changer for our organization. And what we did when we got that money was that we leveraged it towards a larger project of how do we create the infrastructure, not just for our land trust, but all land trusts across the region in all 9 counties, to be able to lean back on a back office where we do have the capacity of the people in law, finance, real estate development, asset management, which are not cheap things, by the way, right? So like a group of tenants can go and try to buy their building, and that could be a very cheap thing, in the sense of that all you really need is you need a tenant organizer, you need someone who's going to talk about pre and post homeownership education and working to create committees, and that labor doesn't have to be that expensive. But when you're talking about the long-term management of a building and going to banks and getting loans and getting those government partners, you need people in those very expensive areas of labor, law, finance, real estate development. And that's not possible for many community land trusts or small nonprofits to demonstrate right away. But that's what they want to see, right? And so we leveraged a portion of our funds to creating a cohort of 14 community land trusts spread across like 8 counties, we're not in all 9 counties, to be able to create this kind of a project, because we want to see more land trusts. It's not about less land trusts, it's about more land trusts, but we need to have this infrastructure to lean on.
And so this cohort will be working with it to build capacity with other organizations, or bringing technical assistance for other organizations?
So this group of 14 is working on a project of a hub spoke model. So this was something that was released in a Spark report about 4 years ago, different models of land trusts and how they work well in some places versus others. And the recommendation, or the issue that was identified was, if we could organize land trusts into a hub spoke, meaning that there is a hub, which it provides the back office, which is the infrastructure for then a bunch of spoke satellite CLTs that maybe operate more lightly in a more agile way, with maybe 1 or 2 staff people providing those services that I just mentioned, like tenant organizing, stewardship, and then they're able to lean on a back office, that actually then creates the efficiencies of scale and also the impact that people want to see. Because one of the problems with the land trust model is that we're small but beautiful, which is a great thing, right? We're rooted in community. We could literally be 8 square blocks and all the residents who live in there, and that's great. But then people look at that and go, well, what's the impact and scale of that if I'm going to invest in this? From the philanthropic and government side. And, we're saying you can have small but beautiful, which is scalable, which is replicable. And that comes from this hub spoke concept.
Wait.
Do we have a question?
I guess my question is, do we run across a building that has tenants in it who would like to purchase this building? Have you run across that kind? You have?
Oh, sure. This is what we operate with. I mean, our most successful projects come exactly from what you just said. A tenant comes to us and says, hey, we're...
And you run across this often? Is that...
All of our projects are essentially this situation of tenants that come to us and say, we're being displaced. We would like to figure out how to buy our building. Is that what you mean?
What? We would like to buy this building. What are the obstacles that's coming from the landlord that owns this building that they want to buy? What are they saying about that?
So that's the starting point for negotiation, right? So some landlords are open to negotiating. Some landlords were forced to become open to negotiating because potentially there were rent strikes going on in the building, or it might be that you're also dealing with landlords that are slumlords and haven't put a lot of maintenance into these buildings, so they're actually looking at it as a problem because they don't have the money to invest in actually bringing the building to the condition that it needs to be in. And so with that deferred maintenance, we can often go to the seller and say, hey, you think your building is worth this much, but let me tell you, we had our construction manager go out there, and this is actually how much you have to put in to make that building worth that much. And it might actually be a better deal for you to offload it to us at this price. So sometimes landlords are willing to work with us, sometimes they're not, right? And if they're not, that's, it's a no-go, right? The model is operating on the ability to get the seller to sell to us.
And there's legislation here locally that provides a window of time for community tenants with support to be able to purchase or make an offer in the building, but it's like 30 to 30 days.
So 30 days to get the financing together, 5 days to put in the letter of response, like a letter of intent that we're interested in the project.
So it's essentially the tenants, they wish to come together to build a cooperative ownership. They have an opportunity to actually, submit a letter of request to purchase, and has to be considered by, if they do it in time, has to be considered by the property owner. But they also have to, be within, the sale costs that the property owner is saying and all of that. But there are structures in place that enable those purchases to.
It's an awkward idea because these people are learning how to own a building in the private ownership. And so it's so complex for me, and it's such a novel idea, and I think it would be great if there's a building in the OMI someplace that tenants would like to buy, and I don't know, are all of the tenants come along screaming and hollering, or they get together before they come to your organization to say, we need help?
It depends. It depends on the situation. Usually there is someone who's acting as the leader, who's most active.
So do they have the support of all the people, or just this person who's the leader of the group, or the spokesman coming first? I don't know.
Usually,
I don't know how this
yeah.
works. I'm just trying to get at.
Yeah, usually if the person is coming to us, they probably feel like they have at least a few other residents interested in the idea, but not everybody has to be sold on it right away. We often are part of, explaining to people what it is, how the model works, what it is that we're doing, and often it's through that process that more people come along.
So what is the percentage of getting all of them in the building, or just some of them all away along the way?
Right. So that's a really good question, a very interesting question, because it's been a real struggle as part of the small sites program that we get 100% participation from the residents. In fact, there are some deals I know in other housing organizations that participate in the program that have really struggled to ensure that all the residents are participating in, for example, income certifications, because income certifications are a critical part of this process. So a requirement of the Small Sites Fund is that all the people who are living there continue to certify that they are below a certain area median income. And that's really for the
So
purpose-
income is a factor.
It is a factor because really we're serving people of low and moderate income. So that's below 120% area median income. Really, in reality, it's below 107% area median income, which is a weird number, but that's what and it changes year to year, but that's the number that we're looking at to get the welfare exemption from the property taxes of the building. And that's why we're income certifying the tenants. Not because if they are above that income, they would have to leave. No. The program is intended to keep everyone housed. So everyone's grandfathered in. Even if you had a very high income and we purchased your building, you're allowed to stay there. The program is not trying to displace anybody. However, for every person who's over income, we have to pay property taxes as the nonprofit, which increases the cost of the entire project. And so we have to know that a good number of the residents in that building are below that threshold of the welfare exemption. And that's what we're trying to achieve.
So if I'm the high income person in this property, you have to level income tax, property tax on it, so it get distributed among all the tenants, how does that work?
It doesn't distribute to all the tenants. It's a property tax pass-through, like the rent board passes through certain kinds of expenses. Like, for example, rent board will pass through capital improvements to the tenants. The Small Sites program doesn't do that. So that's the real benefit of the Small Sites program, is that if your building gets purchased by this government program, you will not have to pay for the rehab that takes place in your building, which is different from rent control, because rent control, the landlord can pass that through directly to you. You'll pay it over a number of years, but you will pay it. Whereas this program, you wouldn't have to pay that. But if you were over income, you would have to pay a property tax pass through, but that's just to you as the individual.
Okay, so I'm the one who has to pay.
That's
okay.
right. That's right.
But that just speaks to, I didn't know anything about, your organization. And so how do you get the information out to, communities that may, feel like, oh, I can use your services and we can collaboratively come together and come to you about being able to purchase.
So CCHO actually has been an amazing source of events. CCHO, the Council of Community Housing Organizations, which is the convener host of this meeting, that has been a really great source for us, actually, of tenants who are under threat of displacement, who are trying to find a way forward on their projects. So a couple of great projects have come through that venue. And that's, again, why I think organizations like CCHO are so important, because you're out in the community and you're doing the advocacy and you're reaching people and you're letting them know, and you're also bringing that information to us as the housing organizations to let us know about these situations of displacement. But otherwise, right now, because the Small Sites Fund is kind of in a hold, I don't know exactly what we're calling it, we haven't been actively going out and looking for projects, but I will tell you, people come to us all the time. They'll write to our info at email. We have a project right now, for example, that was brought to us by HRC, which is a tenant organization. So we're in contact with tenant organizations that know to bring us projects when they pop up. We have a project actually, a 17-unit building in the Mission that was part of the Veritas foreclosure default that took place last year. So this very large developer, Veritas, they owned a bunch of buildings in this city. And by the way, talking about missed opportunities, that could have been an amazing opportunity for the city of San Francisco to have intervened in that foreclosure portfolio and picked up units literally for dollars.
So why didn't they pick them up?
Because I think not enough imagination, not enough guts. You know, like I think that, you know, rather than turning to individuals like us and telling us to take on the risk, government should be taking on risk. Government should be imaginative, thinking big, and trying to think outside the box and taking the risks. Why? Because they're in a better position to take risks than all of us, small nonprofits and individuals, right? They have the backing, right, of banks. They have the support of the state. They should be out there saying, let's think big, let's think creatively, let's create a joint powers authority to purchase and pick up this Veritas portfolio. There was even a bank, Goldman Sachs, that approached the city and said, hey, we'll even help you do it.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And they said,
And they said, too risky, it's gonna be too complicated.
However, wasn't it, I mean, there were some people within city government that were supportive of the idea. Where was the blockage in terms of wanting to actually, you know, move forward? Was that?
It's in the powers that be. Yeah, you know, I will say that.
Really? And then I think Alda had a question too. Yeah.
Hi, sorry. I had a couple questions. So, are there incentives for tenants to participate in the sites, small sites program? You know, financial incentives, minus the fact that, like, you know, they will be having owners, club owners in the building as a way of compensation. And then the other question is, in the OMI, in particular, what are some notices that tenants like this 3,000?
Yeah, you know, we actually had a building that we were here in this district that we were attempting to acquire last year and fell through. So since then, we haven't had a project in this area. We are citywide though, so it doesn't prevent us from engaging in a project in the future. It just really depends on, you know, tenants that are bringing projects forward and then a couple listings that we can act on, but then really paired with the financing to push those projects forward. And as I mentioned, the Small Sites Fund, which is the program that funds these preservation acquisitions, has been kind of put on a hold. And so we're not able to actively go out and act on our listings, but we certainly would love to work in this area.
And if the foreclosure intervention housing preservation program,
sure,
if that were to be funded, it's a statewide program that would actually support households from going into foreclosure up to a single, you know, household unit, single, you know, household. So that would be, if that were to get implemented, combined with what's available in preservation small sites for various types of housing, it could be very meaningful for this neighborhood. That program it's questionable whether it's going to be included. It's about $500 million that's supposed to go in the budget. It's been taken out of the budget, so we're trying to get it back in through the budget.
That's right.
The state budget, that'll be approved next month. But that model perhaps could be supported perhaps by, you know, what the community raises up as a need to be supported by the regional housing bond. So that could be meaningful to the neighborhood. So it depends on, you know, where there's a need for the housing to be preserved, or a household wanting to fight against a foreclosure. If there's like a household that needs a lot of capital maintenance, but the household doesn't have the ability to fund it, that could be eligible for this type of program. Does the city need to create their own program here locally to be able to, so residents can access that? That's, I think, something that's really pertinent to this neighborhood to lift up to the Mayor's Office of Housing. So
yeah, and I also want to mention that program, which we're really crossing our fingers, you know, they can claw back because it was cut from 500 million to 230 million. and now looks like it might be gone entirely, but we're hoping we can claw some of that back in next month. But that fund, so it's intended for foreclosures, but there's a kind of broad definition of what fits the requirement of foreclosure, in the sense of that it could also be that it's a building that has a lot of notice of violations on it. So you can really go after those buildings that are owned by slumlords. So buildings that have a lot of notice of violations on them, buildings where the tenants are actually suing the landlord or want to put in forth a claim based on habitability issues. And so it could be a tool, outside of just the straightforward foreclosure situation, which might be rare, but maybe less so in some neighborhoods. And actually maybe in this particular district, there may actually be, I think, more cases that would fit also the foreclosure and tax delinquency requirements. But it's broader, so you can use it as a tool.
Back so the way in.
Well, I think I did answer the question about the capital and the incentives that she had in the back.
Oh, yeah.
Incentives, are there incentives for the tenants to participate in the program? So do you still want me to answer that part about the incentives? So the incentives, the only real incentive in terms of money in your pocket through this program is what I mentioned earlier about the capital improvements pass-through, that you will not have to pay for the rehab of your building. So that's great. You'll be able to live in a new and shiny building in some ways, right? That was paid for by public tax dollars. But in the situation of where you're living in private housing with a landlord, market rate housing, you would get the property tax passed through to you. So I think that's, or not the property tax, the capital improvements passed through to you. So that's really the primary, I think, incentive. There's no real other incentives directly, other than, you will be permanently housed, you can't get displaced. I mean, those are really important things as well, like intangibles, but tangible things, that's the most tangible.
I just want to speak on that fund that would really help with foreclosures. I was speaking with someone with the Mayor's Office of Housing, and they said they'd gotten an influx. They were trying to do more. They got an influx of people that were in the foreclosure, and how can they get some assistance? What happened is they ended up going to get a hard money loan to get out of the foreclosure, and then they're not able to pay the hard money loan because of the standards of that. So they've been seeing a lot more influx, and I would just speak to that fund. It would really be powerful.
It's very powerful. It's extremely powerful. So this is connected to SB 1079, which was passed. This was authored by Nancy Sinner, and this was to really address the situation of foreclosure, which we know was really prevalent in the 2007, 2008 crisis era. And a really great success story. Northern California Land Trust, one of the land trusts that participates in the 14, among the 14, also a very well-established long-term land trust, has been around longer than us, actually. It's been around since the 60s. They were able to save a home under 1079, so this is before even the fund, the Foreclosure Intervention Housing Fund, was had put into place, but they were able to intervene based on the SB 1079 in stopping the foreclosure of Jocelyn Foreman, who lives in the border of Berkeley, Oakland, home. A black woman who had lived in that home, was born in that home, was about to lose that home because of this exact thing that you were just talking about earlier.
Predatory loans.
Exactly, predatory loans, and she was about to lose her home, and instead, because of 1079, Northern California Land Trust was able to intervene and purchase her home, find the financing to purchase her home, and that is a successful project. That's really the success story of why we need FIP, the Foreclosure Intervention Housing Preservation Program funds. So that was done even without those funds, but it's because of these important policies and these new the creation of these new funding sources that we're able to make these really, really awful outcomes actually turn around, potential outcomes turn around and become success stories. So,
Whitney had a question that we're going to back to you, Barbara.
One other question about the co-op. So I own a co-op, so how do I assure that my heirs will have you said I couldn't be moved out, it's mine forever. So how do my heirs get it after I leave?
Right. So you just write it into your will, right? Like you write it into your will, like they would get my property. It would be probably enforced also at the co-op level already, even if it was absent a will, but like to ensure, right? Situations of probate.
I say will have mine, whatever. They can stay there forever too.
That's right.
Until they will it to someone else. Okay,
To clarify, I know we always say will, but I just want the language to speak the living trust. Because you can have a will, but a will not, that's not going to keep you from probate or anything. So a living trust is, or anything in that trust. And I know I've said that. I'm changing my language so that, because I think that a lot of people in the BIPOC community really don't know that and have not set that up in order for them to continue their generational wealth. And so I think that that's really very important to share.
So are you taking care of that for the community?
I'm sorry?
Are you taking care of that?
So we will in the future be having HERA and some other organizations that will speak to that. And I think that that's really very important. My ancestors worked on wills, and you can have a will, but that's not going to keep your property or any of your estate out of probate. And you just want to avoid probate at all costs.
So, Mr. Simbrick said, and I'm sorry because I'm a licensed attorney, but I hear on the distinction between exactly the living trust and the will. But is it because the property was, you were saying like it was the part, like for part of the property there was a will, but for part of it there wasn't, and that was part of the issue?
For my situation, and I don't know exactly that distinction, but for my situation, my grandmother had a will, and it was for she was leaving her house to the remaining living sibling, and at the time, my mother's 93. She just made 93 last week. She didn't think she was gonna outlive her brother, and so she put her portion. She wanted to put some of her portion into a living trust, which meant that broke the will,
Right. So that's
and put half of. It broke the will, yeah. But if they kept the will, we would have still had to go into probate, and anyone could have come out and said, hey, I need claim to this house. But since she put it in a living trust and set it up the way that she wanted, it did break that will, and we still had to go into probate because my uncle did not have a living trust as well. So, but our 50% of the property was protected, but the other 50%.
The other 50%.
Right, which I wanted to purchase.
I have heard living trusts are more advantageous than wills because you also have the ability to kind of benefit people in your lifetime.
Yes, and you can set it up however you like.
Exactly.
I think you may want to speak to
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say you pretty much spot on. I actually work for a law firm that specializes in estate planning.
Okay.
And so, if you have a will, that's just saying where you want to direct something, and it's a whole, but it doesn't protect you from any tax benefit. It doesn't give you any tax benefits. However, if things are in a trust, you do get those tax benefits. Also, have the ability to determine who gets the property and make sure that it's preserved for family. Because I think, especially in this community, one of the things that we see most often happen is that grandparents may leave the house to children, but the family doesn't necessarily have the money to be able to pay when the taxes go up. There's a huge sharp increase, and so a lot of folks in this community actually lose their homes because of that. And it's just something that we have to be really thoughtful about. that process.
There was an article yesterday, and there's been a few articles that have come out recently in the Chronicle about a lot of this, about the property taxes, how they increase, and the types of structures that could be put in place that could actually prevent the actual ballooning of the property tax. And I'm wondering if the CLT model is one that actually enables that. If there's a transfer from one generation to the next, is there a way to preserve it, protect it from a ballooning in property value?
Well, we have been able in San Francisco to create a really favorable tax situation for our properties, including the limited equity housing cooperative I was referencing, and that's based in some ways on an accident, which is that we had Phil Ting as the assessor. Phil Ting, who's also in the state assembly. So Phil Ting created a really favorable tax situation, was very, very much an advocate and a champion of affordable housing in San Francisco at the time, and so very much tried to find a way that we could reduce the tax liability, given that it's an affordable housing project, right? It makes sense that you would try to reduce its tax implication. So there are very minimal taxes that are associated with Columbus United, and also even in the transfer of the units to new owners or to if it was a family member. And I believe we'll be able to carry that over. That just is based on discussions we'll have with the current assessor. So that's a situation for our co-ops. But it's not necessarily the case for other forms of home ownership, right? I mean, home ownership, you're still taxed. So I think we've been able to create and carve out a really kind of exceptional situation for ourselves, which may not be entirely replicable.
Yeah, connecting to that, you just said I want to know about the Prop 90 for inheritance and the path for property to your children. Is there any advocates who can help us, to help out with that part?
I'm not. What we're finding in terms of our housing events that we've done here in District 11 is that the question is, are there entities, organizations that assist in developing living trusts and enabling households to kind of maintain their generational wealth? And what we're finding is that there actually is a very limited neighborhoods. A lot of neighborhoods lack a lot of support around these issues, whether it's this question of generational wealth and maintaining that, whether it's mortgage assistance, whether it's access to affordable housing with a Dahlia. There was someone mentioned how do tenants hear about what's happening in our neighborhood around these services? And there isn't really an organization in this neighborhood that does that. That's actually one of the things that's been identified as a real need, is that we need these investments in local community-based organizations that can enable residents to deal with a lot of these issues related to housing. And that's the one I think that the article yesterday was referring to, that there's a real lack of knowledge out there about how to safeguard household wealth within a mortgage, within a family situation. So I'm here. One of our organizations who was going to come today to start here is San Francisco Housing Development Corporation. So they probably do some work around that. I imagine you do some work around, a little bit around that.
Right. I can also lift up that, the president of our organization is Smoke Williams, who works for the Sustainable Economies Law Center. And I think that we should alert them to, if people in the community wanted workshops on how to set up living trusts, and that's kind of exactly what they do. They go out and give workshops, and she operates what are called legal cafes, where people can ask questions and come from the community. And so might be
it'd be great to do here.
We definitely need that. That is really why we've been launching so much. I have to shout out EJ. I went to EJ and said, how can we get the word out here? How can I share my story to others? Because I know that I'm not just, single. A monolith. I definitely want to make sure that we gather the resources and have the capacity to help folks. And then, once we were doing it in our community, I have just been bombarded with emails and saying, hey, how can we get this here? How can we work with you, and other organizations to get the word out? We've been looking at doing some virtual, Zooms. But yes, we need to bring more of the workshops here to this community and get the word out and let them know about the resources that they can tap into. Absolutely. I will talk to her about it. That would be amazing.
Because then we could partner up with Temple United Methodist Church or other organizations and churches in the neighborhood to be able to do that outreach and connect people to that information.
I think that's like one of the biggest needs out here in this. I mean, my parents own their home and we help them do the upkeep, but in 2017, we had a lien on the house and we had no idea what to do. So in that sense, at least in the OMI, that's the biggest need is like home ownership, access to education, and doing that here. So it'd be great to partner up with other organizations.
At our last event, we had Hera that came out to clear titles. She just found out about the symposium, and they had gotten a grant. They're from Alameda, but they got a grant to work in 48 different counties, and they clear titles. And a lot of people don't know, like you said, there may be a lien on your property. And then that's one of the resources that they provided as well. So yes, we'd love to get a circular of resources and information as we see that there's many resources that we need here.
And just in my experience, having worked at City Hall for a number of years, is that it takes a lot of community effort to get the city to recognize the needs of this neighborhood. And now that we have the opportunity potentially with this, big bond that's coming forward, it's a real critical moment to kind of lift up the needs that are here around access to work, to information about how to maintain your property, access to housing, and we need something. I would say also in the Portland neighborhood, and Bayview, and Lakeview, and Excelsior, to enable households to really navigate the system of affordable housing access. Absolutely. Whitney.
I used to go to the public bank meetings that get them AB 857 that got passed in California, and which allows cities like Oakland, San Francisco to set up public banks. And has there been any work with that to give low interest loans to people? Because the purpose of the public bank is there's this pipe that we feel like we have to use that charges all this interest to these private banks. We take that pipe out, and there's billions of dollars and millions of dollars that we can use for ourselves in the same way banks do, that they loan out at to the 9-to-1 ratio. And we all always talk about people have money on the money, and there's lots of money there. And that one is, I think it's 2024 that AB 857 passed. Has there been any working with the Public Banking Alliance to bring more reasonable rates per vehicle? The banks, I don't know why they charge us so much. It's just like the student loans. I finally refinanced my house and paid it off, and I was paying I don't want to talk about it, it's too painful, but, I paid for years on this thing, and, why they're allowed to do this is because we allowed it to. And I think with public bank, and then we can pull that, that pipeline and say, hey, this is our money you're taking away, let's use this in our own interest. Has there been any focus on those bonds that are being stolen from this guys?
I heard Saki say earlier about how when a lot of the multifamily properties are owned by Veritas, where the foreclosure process, what we needed from the city was folks that were willing to take risks and to be creative and to imagine kind of how we can grow the city to meet these needs. And I think the public bank is a perfect example of where that is needed. So since the enabling legislation then was passed in AB 857, now you have the opportunity for local cities and counties to charter their own public banks. And there actually has been movement in San Francisco. There was legislation that was passed by Supervisor Preston that kind of jump-started the process, created an oversight body, created a business plan. And now the next step is needed to actually charter the institution. There's still some bumps in the road, kind of like working within the city and the city attorney's office that need to get determined how to move forward. But it really does need kind of communities naming this important need for the city to actually take that step forward. You're right that there's actually kind of like a ticking timeline because AB 857 only gave California cities 10 years to actually move forward these demonstration projects. And, part of what's needed is to take this to the ballot in order to have the voters approve kind of a robust governance for a public bank. But there is a very local opportunity that's coming up because with new federal funds from the Inflation Reduction Act that can actually capitalize local green public banks, there's a way for the city to actually lean on these initial funds as a way to kind of start up the institution. But again, there's some inertia at City Hall, and there's a need really to push decision makers to be able to kind of capitalize on this opportunity.
It seems like, just like they do with the climate change, there's a lot of greenwash where they try to look over there. And what I saw when I went to the last meeting, they're like, they had 7 people up there in these different, committees. And I asked, what's the question? How much do we pay in interest on these that we would use that money? Nobody can answer that question. And it was almost like, don't answer that question. Don't ask that question. That's But that's the most basic question. Now we're literally wasting it on private banks that we use ourselves. But maybe somewhere I'll find out.
I was a great they worked
with public banks, is it it's a funding issue to move forward with it? Is that
Is it a funding issue to move what?
to move forward to have to have a public bank open? I mean, what's the actual stall? What's done?
Yeah. So I think one of the immediate issues is that the city attorney, which would draft the legislation, has basically named kind of the fact that there aren't any local cities haven't created public banks before. It's a new thing. It's an untested thing. It requires kind of expert outside counsel. That outside counsel isn't funded. And so there hasn't really been the city moving forward on actually figuring out what are the articles of incorporation, what do they look like, how do you actually answer all these very important kind of details that will frame kind of what the institution can do and can achieve. That is a very immediate initial kind of roadblock in the way of this process way.
I have a question, because maybe Charlie, you know this, but I was approached recently by a representative from Public Bank East Bay, Is it real?
Yes.
Have they been able to create their own public bank in the East Bay? So this is the first in the region that has been able to utilize this legislation? Because I was kind of like, huh? Wait, is this, I just want to make sure it wasn't a scam, like somebody that was.
No, it's not a scam. It's
It's real. They've been able to do it.
They're
Okay.
ahead of us, I think, and they're more transparent about how much money they were wasting on it. And that's why I asked that simple question at the last meeting. I go, how much are we paying Bank of America, whoever's financing this stuff that we use ourselves? And, it's like, oh, what are you talking about? But, they've actually had, this is very popular in how they funded things in Europe. And they brought a gentleman, there's a good video on it, from Germany. And he was talking about how they've done it, how they put solar pretty much public funds. Frankly, all Germany's like, I think it's, I don't know how many days a year that they are, free from carbon, and it's all renewable. It's called public bank. They were giving people, 1% loans instead of 20%, to put solar on their house, and then they were prorating with their property taxes, and so you can pay an extra $100 every year, and 5 years you got, or what, however many, I'm just full of generalizations out there, but you get the point that they have free electricity, and there's outside issues don't like this. You watch these PG&E ads and how they're making everything safer and cleaner. It's not really true, but that's just my.
Yeah, there's efforts moving forward throughout the state. So Public Bank East Bay is another kind of grassroots kind of effort. They have a bigger lift only because they're not one city and county. They're actually bringing together a variety of cities in Alameda County. And
So they're not up and running.
they're not up and running,
they're still-
but they're trying to get there just like we're trying to get there.
Right, okay. But they're not at a more advanced phase. They're kind of in the same, and they kind of have a bigger lift because of how much they have.
Yeah, and they're following a different path. They basically incorporated as a nonprofit, so they actually are up and running, but they
As a
don't yet
nonprofit.
have the capitalization that's
Okay,
needed in
got
order
it.
to begin making loans.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for explaining that. So like, wow, they did it so quickly, and we're taking so long. Okay, so they're still at a similar phase.
But I mean, for land trusts, there's so much of it is dependent on private financing, and so what a public bank would do is basically, because they're mission driven, you would have much more affordable lending products that would be much more tailored to things like land trusts and cooperative housing and other types of affordable housing investments that would really be possible, which is why I think it is really important.
Oh, yeah.
It could be a game changer. in this area.
Absolutely, and I'm not going to go on and on about how much better it is in Europe in general. Just the conditions that are created for creating affordability in the first place. Like just one line, like the TOPA programs that John was referring to earlier. Right? What does it do? It makes us compete on the market for acquisition of buildings. That's insane. You're using public tax dollars to purchase things which have been inflated by speculation for years, and then you're using public tax dollars to acquire those buildings. Whereas other governments in Europe, right, they create land use plans and they ensure that parts of the city where they're going to build affordable housing don't speculate. So they've been set aside for the purpose of development, and they purposefully keep the speculation at a minimum, right? Whereas what we're doing is we're competing with speculators for buildings. And then, I mean, and Mary, I don't know if you would be willing to share your story, but I mean, it's very much in this story of like, it's even worse than just that story that I just told, but it's the story of like, and then, right? I don't know if you want to tell this story or no? Would you be willing?
I'd like. So we joined we had to do an RFP for COPA. 3 years, it'll be 3 years ago we did this. And we were surprised we got chosen because we had no experience in housing, but we had partnered with Saki. We had a pretty good, solid partnership in the community built up in this RFP, and including SF Block, which is San Francisco Black-led organization. San Francisco Black-led organizations coalition. Thank you. So Majid Crawford was responsible for bringing these, or part of being responsible for bringing now over 80 plus Black-led organizations into this SF block. And so I was excited when we got this, and I thought, okay, let's hit the gate running. And so I had to do preservation classes. I think it was Enterprise, through Enterprise. And so I had to do 12 weeks out of the year before they would even consider us. So I did all of that. I did all of the research and learned how to do pro formas, and Saki was wonderful at helping us with what we needed to do. And so after learning all this, we got one property that we were partnering with Saki on, and really needed to go through COPA. They turned us down.
This story in this building, I mean, it's so shocking.
Well, this was the first one. Remember the first one? This was the first one we went through. And they turned us down, so it was discouraging, but we were learning. And so they said, you know, keep gathering your experience and you'll get a property. And then so this property came about last year, which is where Eddie's Cafe is. And it was in the newspaper. I mean, we were, I'm gonna cry.
Yeah, it is not okay at all.
This is, so this property, I don't know if everyone knows where Eddie's Cafe is. It's at the Visadero in Fulton. Sorry, this was a government project. So this building had 80% retrans in this building. And walking through this building, Eddie's Cafe needed work. They had, the owner had passed. And so somehow they got, the property had gotten a second owner through the children, and he took out a loan, which he wasn't doing anything to preserve the property. He was just taking the rent in. And
So the majority BIPOC building, you know.
yes, 80% retrim. Two of the tenants were white. They had their units were completely redone. The renovations on that, they are beautiful. But then I walk into the others, they didn't let us see everything. We had asked to see all of the units. So I'm assuming those that they wouldn't let us see were the truly worst ones. And so the ones we did go into, it was mold in the showers. The units, I mean, the kitchens hadn't been, all of these properties, I'll say, all of these units hadn't been renovated for over 20 plus years. So you can imagine what they looked like. And it truly was. And he was just taking the money in. And one family, which broke my heart, she had 3 children and made a closet into a bedroom, just a makeshift bedroom so that they could live. And the previous owner, Frank Paratori, and Reverend Amos Brown, were bringing Eritreans over, and I don't know if you know of what they faced in their country, but it was devastating to what they had to deal with. And so they come here, and they were helping them to get acclimated into the U.S., and so some would move on, their family members would come in and take the units, and they were just bringing people out of the Eritrean country to come to a better living situation. And so they come here, and this is what they had to live with. Yet they didn't have fear of death or, you know, being killed. They still were living in slums. And we approached COPA. We talked to Saki. They were willing to partner with us because we were a new QNP. We're not getting the opportunities to purchase properties.
QNP stands for
Qualified Nonprofit. Yes, so there's only, I think there were 18, I think there's only now 16 through OCD that are qualified. So what happens is the properties 3 units or more, they cannot go to the open market until they go through a qualified nonprofit. So we have the first right of refusals on these properties. We have 5 days to apply, and then we, you know, tell them that we're interested, and then we have 30 days to put all of our figures together, go to the property, gather the support. And so I did this, and I've done this free of charge. Like, we're not getting money to do this, and it's, as Saki knows, it's hours and hours. You go to the property and you have to try and get in, and so I went in and I started developing these relationships, and they did not want to support us. They were afraid that if they supported us and we didn't get the property, that whoever took over would, you know, and we were trying to tell them that they could Ellis Act. You know, all of the tenants could be Ellis Acted out of the property, and there's really nothing that can be done, because if they change the structure of the buildings, they can legally do this. And so we're trying to tell them, but they're fearful because of what they've lived through before. Now they're doubly fearful of what's going to happen to us. So I built up a relationship with a tenant in there who was kind of helping build these relationships up, and he kept me informed of what was going on. We put in our offer, and COPA did not want to support this. And we had a very solid offer. The building was going for 3.2, I believe. I can't remember now, it's been a while.
Right.
And then it went down to 2.9. And so we put in.
Very good.
It was,
the subsidy per unit, which is really like the way we measure, like, is this a really good competitive housing project?
Yes.
And the subsidy per unit was really, really low. I can't remember exactly, it was like 150, but or less than 200,000. So it was a very good project. Right?
If I remember, it was around 150, 155, something like that.
Exactly.
And they said, you know, this is my 5th attempt of doing the pro forma, and they had said this was one of the best that had come across their desk. This is working with Saki and working with COPA, teaching
really like
me.
the prime example of what this program is aimed at, right? Like slumlord, habitability issues. You know, it perfectly fit the subsidy per unit. We were getting a great price. You know, a committed tenant organizer really, which is what Gary you became, even though you were not before. Like, a committed tenant organizer who was organizing a very difficult community who really was very deserving, right? You never have access to stable, high quality housing otherwise. Really, like, fit all the, you know, all the check marks. And then the sad part of this, right? I mean, the tragic part of this, I really feel for you, because I know how many hours you put into this. It's like the fact that you put this project in front of the mayor's office of housing, and because of the, you know, lack of funding of this loan sites program, the lack of kind of the ability to act, which is really what is required, because we're competing on fast active real estate timelines. So we need money that can act quickly. And they were unable to commit, right? And then the project fell through. So we went through half for funding, and they were willing to support us. All they wanted was a letter from COPA for no CD. Housing acceleration fund. To put in.
They were.
A letter. From the mayor's office of housing saying, we don't have the money now, but we're willing to commit later. Right, and so they could bring it, give them, you know, the seller the money right away, which is what was required.
They wholeheartedly. I wrote a narrative. I'm a grant writer, so I have that skill of putting that appealing narrative together, and half joined, like they were on board like right away, but we couldn't get the letter. So then we had, fortunately, Richard Hurlbert, who was our broker. He kept finding loopholes to keep us in, like, you know, another 5 days past the deadline. And we appealed to, I reached out to every person that I knew in every city department to help us. OCII would have been able to help us, but they did not have funding left. So it would have been 2 years. Thor Koslowski, who's a great friend of mine and a mentor, they couldn't do that. We went to our supervisor, Gene Preston, who is a very close supporter of our organization, and we support him as well as our district supervisor. And so He appealed to them, they would not do anything. He and Richard worked together to appeal to an OCD and could not get anything, so we took it to the press. And the landlord, the owner that was going to take over is a slumlord. He burned down his...
The new
owner.
Because they're in competition, right?
Yes.
With this other seller.
Yeah.
And not only was he a slumlord, he was a convicted felon. Because he was convicted of arson on his previous buildings.
In
He
2011.
set fire to buildings with tenants of that.
Yes.
And was a convicted felon. And this was the next person in line to own this building.
And usually you don't know who the potential new owner is going to be, but we, through our digging, we found out, and then when we found out who he was, I did all the research to pull all of these articles together because we heard of what he did, and so we appealed to Dean, Dean took it to the press just before Thanksgiving, I believe it was. And we kept going after, we got to the last deadline, and MoCD said, no, we can't do it. Then Richard Singer, who was the owner, I keep saying landlord, he approached our broker Richard, and they've been talking off and on. They said, so he purchased it for $2.7 million at the end of this. So he contacted him around Christmas and said, hey, are they interested in still getting the property? He'd be willing to sell it, back in through COPA at $5.575 million.
Making a killing.
Yeah.
And so this is it. We're not just competing with the market.
Yeah.
We're actually inflating the price, allowing arsonists to purchase the building, right? Inflating the price by, $3 million.
Right.
And then putting it back out for the nonprofits to purchase. I mean, this is an insanity. Yeah.
Completely feel your pain. I was once the housing director for the Brundle Heights Housing Corporation, we were on that first round of folks that became falsified nonprofits. Went through the process. Money was often not available, became an issue. This question is actually for Charlie and kind of John. One thing I could never figure out about COPA was why why got rid of rent control in the bill initially. The tenants had to sign that. And that's why the tenant order had to happen, is because it took the building out of rent control. Do you guys know why that was one of the, why
they did that?
Pieces of that? Because it always seemed very strange to me that.
I think it has to do with the welfare exemption. So basically when the small size program was kind of incubated as a demonstration project, and it became a formal program with the MOHCD in order to kind of conform with the way the city does affordable housing. You have to income certify and make sure that you are within certain area median incomes, and then you can qualify for the welfare exemption in order to get the property tax exempted. And that means you can't really be in the rent ordinance, you have to be in MOHCD's program. And it is a real tension, because as community members that are grappling with living in a home that could be kind of at risk of displacement because there's a speculative investor, there's a pending sale, and then on the other hand, there's an opportunity to become part of this, income restricted long-term affordable program. You kind of weighing the cost and benefits, because you're losing rent control, you're using kind of like just cost protections, and you're exchanging it for this other program. There's a lot of discussions. There's actually a robust conversation that's happened between the community housing organizations and tenant advocacy groups to come up with some community proposals that are now in conversation within the city.
Yeah, because I thought it was hard for a tenant to be able to, come to grips with that, especially if your rent has been locked at a certain rate. But outside of that, I always thought that the program was really impactful because it did give the community the opportunity to purchase, but it didn't necessarily give him the funding streams that they want to.
Right. I will add that I think it also has to do with the way in which it allows the mayor's office like housing to control the terms of the financing, and that
you know, you can escalate you can escalate the rents according to the expenses. And so which you can't do if it was still under the rent board ordinance, because then you'd be stuck with whatever the rent board said you could escalate rents at, right? And whereas sometimes the building's expenses go up, and then to cover them, you're gonna have to escalate rents. And they wanted to be able to have control over that, which then they capped it at 3.5%. But that's much higher than what the rent board is going to set it at. Usually the rent board is setting it like 1.5%, 2%. Last year they made like a big increase because of inflation and everything. So it was like 3.4, but then they went back down this year to like 1.1. So it's, you know, there is a big trade-off, and I think a lot of it has to do with this idea of like trying to make sure that the mayor's office of housing is able to cover, right, the expenses of the building and ensure that it's a sustainable project. But again, for me, this goes to this whole issue of like, well, yes, buildings should pay for themselves and the financing should be sustainable, but let's also acknowledge that, you know, the people we're serving, they may fall into situations where they cannot pay their rent. There will be non-payment of rent situations. We have to build in the reserves into these projects that cover those probabilities, not just as some kind of an emergency or crisis, but that as a preventative measure. We know this will happen, right? Let's not be surprised when it happens, right? And then punish nonprofit organizations that weren't able to keep their projects sustainable, because it's like we're doing our best, right? We're all doing our best to keep these projects as sustainable as possible. We're serving a community that may not be able to always pay their rent. That's just how it is. But yeah, thanks for asking that question, because it is a big part of like the trade-off. One thing I will say, BAFA does not require opting out of the rent board ordinance. The regional fund that we're talking about will produce billions, hopefully. They don't require that you opt out of rent control, which I think will be very strong.
I'll let you know how it ended, because Saki and I were talking about this morning. We were told when we put in our second pro forma that we had to lower all of our operating costs and we had to bring the prices down. So I did that. We submitted a proposal yesterday, 2 days ago. We submitted our proposal to them. They said no. So we got notification yesterday. They turned down our offer. This was, but still the thing is, COPA, this was the COPA property. This is what COPA is about. And they should have done it the first time. They let it go. Other people got the money. This bond measure came through. There was $20 million. They should have jumped on this property because this is what COPA is about. Not to mention, it is the black population that they let down. Yeah. And so this is the second time, again, they have let us down. And this is a black-led nonprofit trying to get this property that is almost all a black population in this building. And so again, and I told Saki this morning, I'm starting to feel like I need to leave this because we don't have the opportunity that these bigger nonprofits have to do this. And we have the perfect property to put through COPA, and they turned us down. So it's very disheartening, and it's a lot of work. I mean, we still have first right of refusal if they decide to sell it to someone else. Again, we'll have to come up with over $5 million to do this, and COPA could have had it at 2.7 last year. So this is where we stand with this. It's very disheartening. Very disheartening.
I think this should go to the media. I think this story needs to go out to the media. I think this needs to be a shame and accountability project. You know what I'm saying? Because there's just too many hours according to this, and those people are still there under the ownership of Arson. I mean, this needs to go to the media.
And we need to build protection for the future, so this doesn't happen another week again as well.
I want to, Saki reminded me one thing with being an arsonist. When we found out that we could get this property again, Dean Preston found out that they had a fire at this building in the laundromat, an accident. the fire chief, Dean alerted them that this is what happened at one of his other properties. And so apparently they investigated and it was considered an accident, but we will never know that. So,
Why is he not in jail?
he went to jail.
Yeah.
He went to prison.
Still come out.
Yeah.
Over day.
So, this has been a really, really great discussion, and I really appreciate ending with your story. And it actually tells us what we need to do to prevent these things from happening again, and also to make sure that as we're creating new investments like the regional bond could provide, is that we're protecting ourselves from this ever happening and building the resources to enable organizations to be successful. And to change the way our government is working that limits that success. And I think going to the press would be a wonderful thing to do. We would love to help with that, to be able to build in that protection moving forward as we look to give residents to want to support the bond and make sure we don't repeat the mistakes.
That's right, and I also feel like your story of NCLF should be told in the sense of that you were set up by the Mayor's Office of Housing to become a QNP, to serve the Black community, which was a community that they identified as underserved, and they wanted to have Black-led QNPs, and that's part of why you were brought in to become a QNP, but then you were set up for failure. You were not set up with the resources that you needed to be able to really make sure these deserving projects that you go through, and instead you'd be wasting hours and hours and hours of your own time and the time of other people in your staff to work on these projects rather than other things that could produce revenue for the organization. So I think that's also an important part of it.
And actually, we didn't have the staff. We only have, at the time, we only had 5 people. We have 6 now, but I was the only one doing this. Majid made sure that I had what I needed, but I did this on my own time.
That just speaks to what you were saying, Renee, that, we are taking the nonprofits, right? They are taking the chance, right? And it should be the government's taking the opportunity to support us. Like, you did not have the support that you needed.
It's almost the feeling of, you have schools where they have to have a certain percentage of Blacks in their schools, and this is almost like they have to have a certain percentage of Black nonprofits, tokens. Yeah.
Well, I know what you're feeling right now is not just for the organization, but for the residents, right? That's really, this is a labor of love.
Yeah. I saw how they're living, and in my heart, it was hard. I had to disengage from everyone for several days after the first time because I saw how they lived, and I couldn't sleep in my own place, knowing how they were sleeping that night. Yeah, and still are. They have not done any renovations on any of the units. And he says he put $750,000 into this building, but none of the units except for a heater has been put in. So these units didn't even have working heaters the first time I came through.
This is such a crime. Good one. We do something good. We just we're just thinking about that. Like Black women we forget about the self-care and preserving yourself because we give so much, we care so much. Who else is gonna do it, right? And it's so important that we just have to come together collectively to, like you said, disengage, right, and fill you up with so much love and energy. Because just thank you for everything.
Yeah, thank you, Mary.
Yeah.
And sorry, this was an emotional project.
Well, let's work on getting this out and understood more by the public. Absolutely. And also use it a way to actually make some real changes in how our Mayor's Office of Housing Community Development works, and that empowers our communities. That's really what I think what we have before us, and and there needs to be serious changes, and having a bond that's on the ballot enables us to come together to actually make sure it's implemented the right way. So, yeah, we look forward to making that happen.
That's the reason how we're doing this. We're coming together so we can build a bigger coalition to continue to support each other through all of this. Yeah.
I want to thank you for sharing your experience and vast experience and knowledge with us. And
Shares for resources and information.
I also want to thank Temple United Methodist Church for having us here.
Thank you.
We would love to come back and do workshops, and I think that would be really
Come
great.
back.
Around generational wealth and living trust, and ultimately having a more rooted organization that could help residents navigate the whole housing access system for affordable housing is essential in this neighborhood. And there's been a slow growth in organizations and nonprofits that have developed, and a strengthening that's happened over the past 15 years, and there's a lot more room to grow to benefit the residents here in the neighborhood. So look forward to doing that work together. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you so much. You get to do there. I should